I often get the question how important a PhD in the pharma industry really is. And the answer to this question is, it depends. My name is Dr. Fabian Muttach, and I do have a PhD in biochemistry. After my PhD, I immediately left the academic world and I now work for a German pharmaceutical corporation. On this channel, I will answer career questions specifically for natural science students and recent graduates who intend to leave academia. If these topics are important for you, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And I promise you, there is definitely more interesting stuff to come for you. Now back to the question. Do you need a PhD to work in the pharma industry? For R&D scientist positions, so for research and development, a PhD is in most cases mandatory. So you must have a PhD to work as an R&D scientist. However, only about 10% of all natural science graduates work in research and development in the long term. Sometimes graduates start in R&D, but then move to other positions after a few years. So if you have a look at what natural science graduates do, for example, 10 years after their graduation, about 90% do not work in R&D anymore. For most other jobs outside of R&D, a PhD is often a nice to have. It may help, but it's not a must. The general rule of thumb is, the more science-related the position is, the higher is the likelihood that you need to have a PhD, or at least that it's appreciated to have a PhD to get a job. Also, larger companies more often ask for a PhD compared to smaller companies. But outside of research and development, it is mostly not a must to have a PhD. So be prepared that if you take a job outside of R&D, you will work together with many or sometimes mostly with people who do not have a PhD. Is a PhD now worthless or even negative if you would like to start a career in industry? And the answer is no. A PhD is seen as the very last step of formal education. And I personally haven't met a single person who sees a PhD really as something negative. And especially in big pharma companies, a PhD can be a plus, also outside of research and development. A PhD shows your employer that you are able to work independently and that you can motivate yourself to achieve progress. And this is actually something very, very valuable in industry. Hence, having a PhD is often well acknowledged in big pharma companies, although from a content perspective, it's actually not needed. But do not expect to get a job just because of your PhD. It's one of really many factors that decide whether you are the right fit for a position or not. And once you got a job, you need to prove yourself just like everyone else. If your quality of work is not good, your PhD will not help you. Always remember that in industry, it's not about titles or degrees. It's all about getting a product to the market to make money in the very end. So should you now do a PhD? If you are really into science, you like working in a lab for the next 3 to 5 years, and you can imagine living on a low budget, then a PhD may be the right thing for you. But if you answered one of these points with no, then you should consider also other options. I would also not recommend to do a PhD just because you think it may improve your employability. The job market for natural science graduates is not the easiest without a PhD, and it remains not the easiest with a PhD. So the driver for doing a PhD should really be your intrinsic motivation and curiosity. Because otherwise, you will have a really hard time while doing your PhD. In the next upcoming videos, I will present different job opportunities. Some of these jobs require a PhD, or at least it's recommended to have a PhD. And for other jobs, a PhD is not really required and maybe just a nice to have. And if you don't want to miss out on this content, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And I will see you in the next video. Yours, Dr. Fabian Muttach.